Welcome to this, the May update for the Year in Our Garden series. Now, as you can see from the tree behind me, autumn is now drawing to its end and winter is on its way. Because of that, of course, the days have been cooler and things are slowing in their growth. The garden, particularly the flower garden, is looking a little bit more drab. There's not so many flowers about. But the good news is that we haven't had any frosts yet. Now, it's not unusual for us to have frosts in May. It's quite common that we would, by the end of May, which is this time, we would have some frosts, not usually very heavy ones, but have had some. But so far, it has just stopped at about the 2-degree temperature. I know in Tasmania, there's been places that would have had lots of frost because there's a lot of cooler places than ours. What that means is that some things like the potatoes are still growing and haven't been cut down, which they would have if they'd had some frost on them. Now, I've done a few things across the month, and the first thing that I want to take you and show you is what I did in the beginning of May in the greenhouse. Today's a beautiful sunny day here in Tasmania, which we haven't had too many of lately because it is late autumn and we've had lots of rain. But I'm working here in the greenhouse today. I've got these 2 beds to plant. Now in this one, there's masses of parsley plants have come up, and I'm going to try and rescue a few of those. There's so many, I can't use that many of them, but I'll rescue a few of those and put into some pots so that I can plant them elsewhere later. But my intention is to prepare this and plant some winter potatoes in this bed. On my left here, we've got parsley, which is really getting heavily picked this time of the year because it's not growing as fast as it does in the summer. It will stay, and I'll leave it to go to seed in the next year, or at least some of it. There's a lot of chickweed that's come up here where we had basil, and the basil's now finished because it's cooled off. I don't like to pull the chickweed out straight away because it is useful as a green. It's really good in salads. It's probably more nutritious than lettuce, well, pretty much certainly more nutritious than lettuce, and really tasty too. But I've got chickweed elsewhere, so this can come out now and I'll plant something in there. I'm not certain what I'm going to plant in there yet. I'm still thinking about that. So our first mission is to try and extract some of these little parsley plants. Ooh. And it's quite tricky because they've actually got quite deep roots. Parsley in some ways really needs to be either seeded directly or grown in the actual pots that you're going to transplant, because doing it this way I don't know how successful this is going to be. But look, I've put a bunch in there, and if I get one plant out of it, I will be happy. There's lots here to work with. We'll give that some water very quickly. See if we can get some more.
Can I have a go?
You can have a go.
Putting it in.
What are you going to?
And I'll put soil.
You're going to put the soil around. Go for it, quickly. Up at this end of the bed, I've got these extensive roots, and I was wondering what they are. I'm pretty certain they're actually coming from the black currants outside. They come in underneath and come up and feed off the bed. So I'm going to try and get as many of those out as I can, because I'll just take nutrient and water out of this bed. The downside of having a plant like that close to a veggie patch. They're quite, yeah, that's where they're coming up. Adventurous, looking for food. Look at all that root. Now, given that I'm going to plant potatoes in here, I'm going to loosen this bed considerably more than if I was going to plant anything else, and also dig 3 furrows into it to plant into, or you could just dig holes. Now I've got some really nice potatoes here ready to go into the ground. I'm going to do these furrows one at a time because of the space. Now I'm scratching into the bottom here a little blood and bone and just stirring that in before planting the potatoes into it. I'm going to plant 5 potatoes in each row. You want to plant one, Samuel? Yeah, about there. A bit towards the edge of it.
You mean here? Can I do one more?
If you come up this end, you can put one in there. There you go. That's good. So 5 in, and then we can cover it over.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh. What about the root tops?
The shoot?
Yeah.
Well, we'll try and keep it straight. We've got one shoot per potato, which is really good.
That one of them aren't sharp. So, well, this one has a.
That's
sharp,
okay.
but one hasn't shown root top.
That'll be just good. And then we'll do another row. Once the potatoes are in there, I'll cover it, and then I will come back and put some compost. It's green waste compost that I'm using, commercial compost, over the top of it all, which will help suppress any weeds and of course feed the ground as they grow. Now in this bed, I was wondering what to put in. I've decided to plant some volunteer spinach that I had outside. There was still plenty of it there, and it's not doing much because it's cooler and slower. So I thought I'd bring it in here and see how it goes. It should move a bit faster inside. And I've also got some seed, spinach seed, that I'll plant in the remainder as well, and see how the seed compares to these transplants. So these are nice and easy. With a bit of water, they'll settle in really well and hopefully give us some nice quick early spinach. Well, overwinter spinach maybe I should call it, because we already have outdoor stuff that has been growing across the autumn and has been very heavily picked. So basically we do like to use spinach and simply can't grow too much of it. Garden beds like this that are against the wall are always a little bit of a problem. I'm always reluctant to, well, I think of it as waste the space on a path up the side, but if I had a path on the other side, I wouldn't be standing on my bed, and I don't really like having to climb on the bed to plant things like this. But I just didn't put that path in and put it into bed space instead, so this is what you have to do. Of course, I could use a board or something, which probably wouldn't hurt. But I'll loosen it up in a minute anyway. One more plant. Put it in there, see if it'll grow. It's a bit rough, that one. I never like to wait very long when I transplant things like this before giving them water. You don't want them to go into any stress. especially as the sun is still shining and it's still warm. Well, it's now afternoon and will start to cool off. They still might stress a little bit. I think one of the lessons of this is that if you're putting a bed around the wall or the edge of a greenhouse, make it narrow enough so that you can reach across, and then you simply won't have to do this. So that was around about 2 weeks ago that I did that work here, and now you can see the potatoes are all pretty much all showing their leaves anyway. There's a few weeds coming through and I need to give it a little bit of a scratch, but that's looking good. And with the spinach that I transplanted, it's had some shock, but it will recover fairly quickly, I think. Some of the seeds have come through, not all. It didn't probably help that the dog came and walked around on these beds after I planted them, but I think that most of those will come, and it will be interesting to see how that develops. Now, last month this corn was about to pick, but now 4 weeks later it's all been picked and eaten. It was enjoyed to have that late corn. The crop wasn't huge, even the cobs weren't large. I'm not really surprised at that, given that it was grown indoors in late season. One thing that I did notice was that the silk of the corn, which normally is an indicator of the ripeness of the cob by darkening when it's outside, didn't really always happen here. Some didn't darken at all, it still stayed quite light as if it wasn't ripe, but the corn cob was ready to eat. So you had to actually test the cob, feel it, maybe open it to really be sure. What I need to do now, that's going to happen in the next week, is that this corn will come out, and this bed I will plant potatoes in it again, the same as I've done the other one, so that we'll have a couple of beds here of very early spring potatoes. Now, if you're wondering how the capsicums have gone, we did get a really nice crop, but they've now come to the end. There is no more here that I'm aware of to pick, and the plants are beginning to show some stress. So I will shortly take those out, probably next week. I'll get to that, and there is a jalapeno here which still has some fruit on it, so I might leave that for a little bit longer and just see how it goes. Also underneath here I've got some sweet potatoes which were volunteers, and I'll see what I can find in those, so that'll be interesting to find. Hopefully there's some good sweet potatoes in there. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to follow these with. I'm thinking possibly some broccoli over winter. I usually try and grow some broccoli in the greenhouse across winter because it moves a lot faster than it does outside. Now, some of you may recall that I pruned the tamarillo early in spring. I had also removed the frost cover that I keep over it. And so now at the end of the year, there was the need to build a new cover. This time I decided to try and create something that would last a bit longer than the last one. And so I built it out of some steel pipe, a simple bolt together frame, and using some poly for the roof structure. I did tie this down, not that it's very likely to come off. I hoped to use the existing shade cloth that I had used previously, but I found that it was actually too small because my frame was larger, and I had to buy some new shade cloth, and you simply can't buy shade cloth actually of the size that I needed, so I had to stitch it together to create a sufficient size cover. But I got it over. I've tied it down simply with some zip ties to keep it in place. So now it's looking quite good. I think it will stay on quite effectively and give this the cover that it needs to stop the intensity of frost on it over winter. The thing about a cover like this that actually lets the rain through is that it can stay there all year. I don't need to take it off at all, and I can forget about it now for quite a few years. and being reasonably strong, I know it's going to withstand the winds. Now, while we're in this corner of the garden, I noticed that some passion fruit have fallen off, so you might be interested to have a look at this vine and see what they ripen like. Now, one of the odd things here is that they're not getting the intensity of the heat and sun. So in a more northern climate and a more sunny position, perhaps, passion fruit that are ripened will go quite black, being a black passion fruit naturally. However, this one doesn't. They go slight blackening, but sometimes they're actually still quite green looking when they fall off. We don't pick them off the vine, we simply let them fall and then pick them up off the ground and then let them sit for a few days before eating them. And they're then nice and sweet. But it's now starting to crop and will give us passion fruit quite continuously over a good probably 2 months. It continues to just drop passion fruit. So well worth growing, and a nice little bit of extra flavour at this time of the year when there isn't, apart from the apples in storage, a lot of fresh fruit around. As I mentioned in the intro, the flower garden has started to go past its best. The weather really starts to take a toll this time of the year with the rain, wind, but there's still some bright spots. There's still some nice flowers coming around. Some of the roses still hanging around. Even though the weather does knock them around a little bit, they still create some colour. And Elizabeth has been busy over the last month putting some plants in some pots that undoubtedly are going to look fantastic in the springtime and grow through our next summer. So again, here in Tasmania, this is a time where you can actually do a lot of preparation for the next year. Well, I thought I had this film all done a few days ago, but when it came to editing, I found that the cyber gremlins had wiped out a lot of the film. So I'm back for a second take. What I wanted to show you here was where I had the chickpeas growing. I have put in some oats. That will simply be some greens for the hens over winter. I simply scattered the oats around and gave it a scratch with the fork hoe. I didn't cultivate it at all, and you can see it's germinated really well with the rain that we've had. After this has grown a little bit more, I'll let the hens in and they'll have a good pick through here over the couple of months over the winter, and of course naturally fertilise it, and it'll then be ready for some spring planting. I'm thinking I might bring the pumpkins in here this next season and maybe some pole beans, but we'll see how the season goes. Now, while I was in this area, I wanted to show you what I've done with the avocado trees that I have put plastic around to try and keep it a little bit warmer. So we'll see how they go across winter. So as you can see here, the brassicas are doing really well. The cabbages are actually starting to heart a little bit, and it won't be long before there's 1 or 2 of these that are ready to use. I will come in and start using them fairly early. Because there's so many, I don't want to wait till they are too developed, so that you can then actually move through them a little bit more across the winter. If you wait till they're too developed, then you'll have too many ready at once. And of course that's going to be the situation with the collies when they come. They're not quite showing any heads yet, but it's not very far away. With the broccoli here, there's quite a few that are actually now ready to pick, and I will pick those today. Now, because there are so many here, I will probably freeze some of these. I'll blanch it and freeze it because it's too much too quickly. And that's a problem when you have so many planted at the same time. It's something that I really need to work on next season to actually achieve more staging so that I have fewer coming at once, but more successive plantings. In the raised beds, not a huge amount has changed since last month. The main differences are that the lettuce here that I transplanted has grown nicely, and it won't be long before we pick leaves off that. It come from this bed where we have been pulling out whole plants and eating them, just pulling them out. It's hard to see where we've actually impacted it because there's so many plants there. Things are growing fairly well. The leeks are looking really good now, and we're slowly eating those, and they're nice and big. The climbing bean here, I'm picking some of the dry ones off them as they dry on a fine days like this, and I'll put them aside for seed. But there's still some that are not yet dry, so I'll leave it there for a little bit longer. Now behind the leeks here, I did plant some spring onions. Probably about a month ago I put these in. I think it was, yes, about the beginning of May, and they're growing quite nicely. The spring onions will cope with our winter, and so towards the end of winter and early spring, we're going to have these ready to harvest. So it's not a bad idea. We often tend, calling them spring onions, we often tend to forget about them until spring comes, and then we have them late spring, early summer. Whereas planting them this time of the year, you get them a lot earlier. Now, this area where I had pumpkins, tomatoes and corn, I was a little bit debating with myself what I should do with it. I could have put green manure into it over winter because it's not going to be used now until August at the earliest, so at least 2 months. But there was so much vegetation already on the ground, both in terms of weed but also straw, that I felt there was no real need to do that. The simplest thing was to do what I've done here, which is to put plastic over it. It'll sit for 2 to 3 months now. The worms will eat all that vegetation, just as they did where I had the corn, and turn it back into soil, and it will then be ready for spring planting. It will be a little bit drier than it would otherwise be, which is a good thing. It means the soil's a little bit sweeter. Now, I know a lot of people don't like using the plastic. You can use cardboard cartons if you'd like, but I always find the issue with those is keeping them in place. So you end up having to put straw on top of them to keep them down, and then you get wheat growing in the straw. So you end up with a different end result, and often quite a bit of work as well. So this is really simple. The plastic is reused year after year. So to finish up, I thought we'd come and look at the garlic. Now, it's looking rather weedy at the moment, but the good thing is that the true garlic is growing really well. I think there was only one failure in the whole row, and the elephant garlic has come through. It's now about this high. I'm not sure you can see. The weeds tend to hide it a little bit. Ideally, I would have used a weed-free mulch on this when I planted it. I simply didn't have it available at the time. I only had straw, and as I said a moment ago, my experience with straw is that I get a lot of wheat germination, sometimes even other grasses and weeds. So ultimately, I end up doing as much work with the straw as if I didn't put down anything. So what I will do in the next few days, hopefully if it dries out a little bit, if we get a couple of days of sunshine like today, then I can weed this and mulch it, probably with some composted wood chip or something along those lines. So apart from this type of regular maintenance, what am I actually going to do in the next month? What am I going to plant? Well, there's only 3 things that I will plant, and I did mention some of those. One is likely to be some broccoli in the greenhouse, and also some more of those early potatoes in the greenhouse. So that'll be 2 beds that get planted there over the next month. Also, where these lettuce are, I'll take those out and I'll plant some snow peas. I find that they go quite well across winter. They will get a good start on, and that means that they will actually be ready to eat a lot earlier in the spring than if you wait till later. So that's pretty much the only planting that I'm going to do in the next month. Okay, so that's our roundup for May. I'll come back at the end of June and again show you what's been happening over the month.